Close your eyes, if you have not already done so. You are lying somewhere soft, somewhere still, and the world outside has grown very far away. There is a darkness behind your eyelids that is not empty. It is full. It is the same darkness that existed before the first word was spoken over the deep, and it is patient, and it is vast, and somewhere inside it, something geometric is descending. You do not need to chase it. It is coming toward you. Let the weight of your body sink a little deeper into whatever surface holds you now. Feel the pressure of the earth beneath you, solid and old and indifferent to the passage of empires. And as you breathe, slowly, without effort, let me tell you about the end of the world. Not the end that burns and screams, the other end, the one that arrives in perfect silence, in perfect geometry, in a form so enormous and so mathematically absolute that the human mind, encountering it, would have no category for what it was seeing, only the category of the sacred, only the category of the impossible made permanent. This is the story of a city that no human being has ever built, and that every human civilization has somehow always known was coming. It begins, as so many of the deepest things begin, in a vision. A man on a small island in the Aegean Sea, surrounded by the sound of water, exiled there by an empire that had already executed his colleagues and burned his communities, and renamed the world in its own image. The island is called Patmos. The man is called John. And what came to him there, in whatever state of consciousness the text describes as being in the spirit, was not a comfort. It was a disclosure, a forced opening of the inner eye to something that the ordinary waking mind is not equipped to process without damage. What he saw, or what moved through him, or what he was shown, was the structure of time from the outside, the whole arc of it. The beginning and the middle and the thing that waits at the end, patient as geometry, vast as the silence between galaxies. And at the very end of what he saw, there was a city. But before we go to that city, before we allow ourselves to approach it, we need to understand what had to be destroyed to make room for it. Because the city does not arrive into a world that is still standing. It arrives after everything else is gone. The text says that John saw a new heaven and a new earth, and that the first heaven and the first earth had passed away. This is a sentence that moves past you very quickly if you are reading casually. But if you stop and let it settle into your body, it becomes something else entirely. The first heaven and the first earth had passed away, not reformed, not renovated, not improved, passed away. The entire physical cosmos, every star and stone and ocean and atmosphere, every mountain that ever cast a shadow, and every sea that ever drowned a sailor, every civilization that ever raised a wall against the dark, all of it, gone, dissolved back into whatever preceded it. The text offers one additional detail that functions almost like a geological survey of annihilation. There was no longer any sea. That phrase carries more weight than it appears to. In the cosmological imagination of the ancient Near East, the sea was not merely a body of water. It was the oldest symbol of chaos. It was the primordial disorder that existed before creation, the deep that the Spirit moved over in the opening verses of Genesis, the waters that the Babylonian god Marduk split in half to make the sky and the earth. To say that there was no longer any sea was to say that chaos itself had been unmade, that the oldest adversary of order, The force that always waited at the edges of the created world and threatened to return it to formlessness had been permanently and finally defeated. Not suppressed, not contained, unmade. And into that silence, into that vast and orderless and lightless void where the first creation had been, something descended. Sink a little deeper now. Let your breathing slow. You do not need to hold on to anything. The city came down out of heaven from God. That is how the text describes it. Not built upward from the earth, as every human city has always been built, stone laid upon stone, ambition laid upon ambition, the whole trembling architecture of human civilization reaching toward something it could never quite touch. This city moved in the opposite direction. It came down, it descended. It was lowered, or it fell, or it arrived in the way that a geometric truth arrives. Not from outside, but from above. Not constructed, but disclosed. The logic of it is the inverse of every tower humanity has ever raised. Babel reached up and was scattered. This city reached down and was absolute. An angel came to John with a golden measuring rod. And this detail is not decorative. The measuring rod is one of the most charged objects in the entire visionary literature of the ancient world. It appears in Ezekiel, 6 centuries before Revelation, when the prophet is taken in visions of God to a very high mountain and shown a figure whose appearance was like bronze, standing at the gate of a vast and terrifying structure, holding a linen cord and a measuring rod. The act of measuring in this tradition is not administrative. It is not the work of a surveyor checking property lines. It is a cosmological act. It is the imposition of divine proportion onto space. It is the declaration that this place, these dimensions, this geometry belongs to the order of the sacred and not to the disorder of the profane. When the angel measured the city in John's vision, the angel was not gathering data. The angel was performing a ritual of cosmic claiming. And the measurements were these: 12,000 stadia in every direction, length, width, and height, all equal, all the same, all perfect. 12,000 stadia, which the scholars translate as approximately 1,400 miles, 1,400 miles long, 1,400 miles wide, 1,400 miles tall. A perfect cube. Let that settle for a moment. Let the number move through you without trying to visualize it immediately, because the mind resists it, and the resistance is part of the experience. 1,400 miles is roughly the distance from the eastern seaboard of North America to the middle of the continent. It is the distance from London to beyond the Ural Mountains. It is a distance that, if you were to walk it, would take you the better part of a year, moving every day, resting every night, watching the landscape change around you from coast to plain to mountain to desert and back again. And this city is that distance in every direction simultaneously. It is a cube of that scale, a perfect, geometric, impossible cube of gold and jasper and crystal and light, descending through the darkness of a sky that no longer has stars, lowering itself toward an earth that no longer has a sea, filling the horizon in every direction until there is no horizon left, only wall, only foundation, only the blinding, sourceless light of a divine presence that no longer requires a sun to make itself visible. The upper reaches of this city, if we are to think about it in physical terms, and the text invites us to do so even as it defies physics at every turn, would extend far beyond the atmosphere. The boundary where the atmosphere ends and space begins, the Kármán line, sits at 62 miles above the surface of the Earth. The International Space Station orbits at roughly 250 miles. This city would reach 1,400 miles into the sky. Its highest levels would exist in the frozen silence of the exosphere, in the near vacuum where the last traces of atmosphere dissolve into interplanetary space. From the surface of the moon, it would be visible as a glowing geometric shape against the face of the Earth, a perfect square of light, like a captured star that had been taught the discipline of right angles. And it would be descending, moving, arriving. The visual effect of its approach through whatever atmosphere remained would be unlike anything that has ever been described in the language of ordinary experience. The wall of the city is jasper, described elsewhere as clear as crystal, which is itself an impossible description, because jasper in the physical world is opaque, a dense and earthy stone of red and green and brown, not transparent, not crystalline. But the city's materials are not physical in any sense we can measure. They are the materials of a world where matter has been transformed beyond the physics of the fallen creation. The jasper wall, clear as crystal, would function as a prism of incomprehensible scale. The light from within the city, the divine radiance that replaces the sun and the moon, would pass through that crystalline jasper and fracture into its constituent colors, bending and spreading across the sky in bands of color that would cover entire continents. Slow auroras of deep sapphire and violent emerald, and the dark arterial red of sardius stone, moving across the atmosphere at the pace of geological time, visible from every point on the surface of the Earth simultaneously. You are drifting now. You can feel it. The weight of your body is becoming something gentle, something that belongs to the Earth. Let it. The foundations of the city are 12 layers of gemstone, 12 distinct strata of mineral light, each one a different color, each one carrying the name of one of the apostles. Jasper and sapphire and chalcedony and emerald and sardonyx and sardius and chrysolite and beryl and topaz and chrysoprase and jacinth and amethyst. These names are not merely decorative. They are the names of the stones that were set into the breastplate of the high priest of ancient Israel, the sacred garment that the priest wore when he entered the Holy of Holies on the Day of Atonement, the one day of the year when a single human being was permitted to stand in the presence of the divine without dying from the proximity. The breastplate held 12 stones, one for each tribe of Israel, each stone engraved with a name, each stone corresponding to a cosmic order that the ancient world associated with the movements of the stars and the divisions of time and the structure of the heavens. The city's foundations are that breastplate, expanded to a planetary scale. The city is not merely decorated with these stones. The city rests upon them. The city is built on the cosmological order that the priestly tradition encoded into the garment worn against the chest of the one human being who stood, once a year, in the forbidden room. And here is the thing that I want you to understand about that forbidden room, because it is the key to everything else. The Holy of Holies in Solomon's temple was a cube, 20 cubits long, 20 cubits wide, 20 cubits high, roughly 30 feet in every direction, a small room, a dark room, a room covered entirely in pure gold, into which no light entered from outside, because the divine presence was itself the light. A room separated from the rest of the temple by a thick curtain, a veil, which in the tradition of the time represented the boundary between the world as it is and the world as it was meant to be, between the creation that had gone wrong and the presence that could make it right. Only one person could enter that room, only on one day of the year, only after extensive ritual purification. The approach to the Holy of Holies was the most carefully managed, most carefully restricted, most carefully guarded approach in the entire ancient world, because what was in that room was not safe. What was in that room was the full, unmediated presence of the divine. And the full, unmediated presence of the divine, encountered without preparation, was understood to be lethal. The New Jerusalem is that room, scaled to the size of a continent, descending from the sky, with its gates permanently open. The text says the gates are never shut. 12 gates, 3 on each side, each gate a single pearl, each gate attended by an angel, each gate bearing the name of one of the 12 tribes of Israel. The gates are never shut. Day and night they stand open, except there is no night, because the divine glory is the light, and the divine glory does not set. The gates are open, and the nations walk through them, and the kings of the earth bring their glory into the city, and nothing impure can enter, but the gates are never shut. This is the theological move that the vision is making, and it is one of the most radical moves in the entire literature of the sacred. The forbidden room has become the world. The veil has been removed, not by tearing it, as the gospel accounts describe happening at the moment of the crucifixion, but by making the entire cosmos into the space that was once behind the veil. There is no longer an outside. There is no longer a secular space, a profane space, a space where the divine is absent or distant or veiled. The Holy of Holies has engulfed everything. You are inside it. You have always been inside it. The only question was whether the walls were visible yet. Let the darkness hold you now. You are very far from the noise of the ordinary world. There is a tradition that predates the New Jerusalem by several centuries, preserved in fragments of manuscript among the Dead Sea Scrolls, which the scholars call the Aramaic New Jerusalem text. The fragments are numbered 4Q554, 4Q555, 5Q15, and several others, and they were composed sometime between 150 years before the Common Era, making them older than the Book of Revelation by at least a century and a half. They were found in the caves above the Dead Sea, in the same collection as the War Scroll and the Community Rule and the Great Isaiah Scroll, preserved in the dry air of the Judean desert by a community that had withdrawn from the world because they believed the world was already corrupt beyond ordinary repair. The Aramaic New Jerusalem text is structured as a guided tour. An angelic figure holds a measuring rod, and he leads the visionary through the streets and blocks and gates of a vast city, measuring everything, recording the dimensions of every wall and avenue and residential district with an obsessive precision that reads less like prophecy and more like divine urban planning. The city in these fragments is enormous, but it is earthly. It rests on the ground. It is rectangular rather than cubic. It has a central temple complex. It has residential blocks organized by tribe. It is, in essence, a perfected version of the world as it is, a city built on the pattern of the sacred rather than the pattern of human ambition. But still, a city of this earth. Still a city that belongs to the category of things that exist within the created order. What Revelation does to this tradition is something that cannot quite be described as development. It is more like transfiguration. The earthly city of the scrolls becomes a celestial object. The rectangular plan becomes a perfect cube. The central temple disappears entirely because the entire city has become the temple. The divine presence, which in the Qumran tradition still required a sacred precinct, a dedicated space within the city where it could dwell in a manner appropriate to its holiness. in Revelation requires no precinct at all. God and the Lamb are the temple. The city is the temple. The cosmos is the temple. The distinction between the place where the divine dwells and the place where everything else happens has been abolished. This is the theological distance between the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Book of Revelation, and it is a distance measured not in years, but in the complete restructuring of what it means for the divine to be present in the world. And there is a parallel to this in a tradition even older than the Dead Sea community, a tradition that goes back to the very beginning of the recorded history of human civilization, to the river valleys of Mesopotamia, to the cities that stood in the flat land between the Tigris and the Euphrates when the rest of the world was still learning to plant grain. The Sumerians believed that civilization itself had descended from heaven. The Sumerian king list, one of the oldest historical documents in existence, begins with a statement that has never been adequately explained by purely secular historiography. After the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu. Eridu, the first city. The city that the Sumerians believed was the oldest city in the world, founded by the god Enki, built over the Abzu, the primordial freshwater aquifer that was understood to be the source of all life, the underground ocean of creation from which the rivers and the springs and the fertility of the earth all ultimately derived. The city descended from heaven. Civilization was not invented by human beings working upward from necessity. It was lowered from above. It arrived as a gift, or as an imposition, or as both simultaneously, which is perhaps the most honest description of what civilization has always been. And at the end of the Bible, at the end of the entire arc of the story that begins with the first word spoken over the dark waters of the deep, the city descends from heaven again. The first city and the last city share the same origin. They come from above. They arrive as gifts, or as impositions, or as both simultaneously. But where Eridu was the beginning of the human story, the New Jerusalem is the end of it. And where Eridu contained a temple to the God who made it, the New Jerusalem contains no temple at all, because the God who made it has become the city itself. You are going deeper now. You can feel the thoughts loosening at their edges, becoming soft, becoming something that floats rather than something that holds. There is a detail in the description of the New Jerusalem that I have been holding back, because it requires a certain quality of attention, a certain willingness to sit with paradox without resolving it. The detail is this. The city is made of pure gold, like transparent glass. Pure gold, like transparent glass. Gold is opaque. This is one of the fundamental physical properties of gold, the thing that makes it visually distinct from every other metal, the warm, impenetrable luster that has made it the symbol of permanence and value across every culture that has ever encountered it. Gold does not let light through. Gold absorbs light and returns it as radiance, but it does not transmit it. And glass is transparent. Glass is the opposite of gold in this specific quality. Glass lets the world through. Glass is the material of windows, of lenses, of the boundary between inside and outside that allows vision without passage. The city is made of both simultaneously. It is opaque and transparent at once. It is the material of permanence and the material of permeability fused into a single substance that has no name in the physical world because it does not exist in the physical world. It is the material of a world where the distinction between the hidden and the visible has been abolished, where there is nothing inside that cannot be seen from outside, and nothing outside that cannot be felt from within. It is the material of total exposure. and the jasper walls are clear as crystal, and the foundations glow in their 12 colors, and the streets are the same impossible gold glass, so that to walk on them would be to walk on something that was simultaneously solid and transparent, to see the foundations beneath your feet and the light rising through them, to feel the ground as something that was also, somehow, sky. This is what the ancient Egyptians were reaching toward when they built their temples as cosmological arguments. The temple at Karnak, the great complex at Luxor, the innermost sanctuaries of the most sacred sites along the Nile, these were not merely buildings. They were models of the relationship between order and chaos, between the created world and the uncreation that surrounded it. The Egyptians understood that the act of building a sacred space was the act of repeating the first act of creation. The moment when the primordial mound, the Bin stone, rose from the waters of the noon, the dark and formless chaos that preceded existence, and became the first solid thing, the first place where the Creator could stand, the first point from which light could radiate outward into the void. The New Jerusalem is the Bin stone at the scale of a world. It is the primordial mound, the first solid thing, the first place where the divine can stand, expanded to cover the entire surface of the earth and reaching up through the atmosphere into the silence of space. It rises from the abolished sea, from the chaos that has been permanently unmade, and it radiates light not from a sun above it, but from the divine presence within it, the way the Bin stone radiated the first light of creation from the moment it emerged from the dark waters of the beginning. The Egyptians also organized the cosmos geometrically. They spoke of the square of the heavens, the four corners of the universe held in place by the four sons of Horus, the guardians of the cardinal directions, the pillars of the cosmic order that prevented the sky from collapsing back into chaos. 4 corners, 4 directions, 4 faces of the cube, plus the top and the bottom, which are also faces, which are also directions, which are also the 6 faces of the Holy of Holies expanded to the scale of the cosmos. The New Jerusalem has 3 gates on each of its 4 sides, 12 gates total, 3 to the east, 3 to the north, 3 to the south, 3 to the west. The city faces every direction simultaneously. It has no back. It has no blind side. It is perfectly symmetrical in its openness, perfectly equal in its access, perfectly balanced in the way that a cube is balanced, which is to say that it is the same from every angle, the same from every approach, the same from above and below and from all 4 cardinal directions. It is the geometry of perfect justice, because justice, at its most fundamental, is the refusal to have a preferred angle. There is a tradition in Jewish mysticism, encoded in one of the oldest and most obscure texts of the Kabbalistic literature, a text called the Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Formation, which maps the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet onto the fundamental dimensions of the universe. 6 directions, 6 faces of the cube, 12 diagonal edges, 12 boundaries of space, 3 axes, 3 internal dimensions. The cube of space, as this tradition calls it, is the structure of existence itself, the geometric grammar of the created world, the form within which everything that is happens. The 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet are not merely a writing system. They are the 22 dimensions of the cube of space, the 22 ways in which the divine creative energy moves through the structure of reality to produce the world as we experience it. If the New Jerusalem is the divine manifestation of the cube of space, then its descent is not the arrival of a building, It is the arrival of the grammar of existence itself, made visible, made physical, made permanent. The structure within which all things have always happened. The invisible geometry of the created order, lowering itself into visibility at the end of time and saying, "This is what was always here. This is what you were always inside. You simply could not see the walls." Let your breathing be slow now. Let it be very slow. There is nothing you need to do. The Book of Enoch is not in your Bible, not in most Bibles. It was read widely in the centuries before the Common Era, quoted in the New Testament letter of Jude, preserved in Aramaic fragments among the Dead Sea Scrolls, and treated as scripture by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church to this day. But for most of the Christian and Jewish traditions, it was set aside, excluded, marginalized, placed outside the boundary of the canon by a series of decisions made in councils and letters and theological arguments that stretched across several centuries. The reason for its exclusion is debated. The reasons given vary depending on who you ask and which century you are asking about. But one of the things the Book of Enoch contains, one of the things that made it difficult to manage within an institutional religious framework, was a description of heaven that was not comfortable. Not the comfortable heaven of later Christian imagination, the gentle light and the reunion with loved ones and the sense of finally coming home. The heaven of Enoch is terrifying. It is a place of crystal and fire and lightning and vast cold darkness, a place where the floors are made of flame and the ceilings are made of stars, and the walls are made of a substance that is simultaneously ice and fire, impossible and contradictory and absolutely real. It is a place where the divine presence is not a warm light, but an overwhelming force, a consuming totality that the human soul can barely endure even in vision, let alone in actuality. And when you read the description of the New Jerusalem, the transparent gold and the crystalline jasper and the sourceless light and the absence of night and the absence of shadow and the absence of any space that is not fully, permanently, inescapably illuminated by the divine presence, you are reading something that belongs to the same visionary tradition as Enoch's heaven. You are reading a description of a place that is not designed for comfort in the ordinary human sense. It is designed for something else, something that requires the complete dissolution of the ordinary human categories of inside and outside, safe and dangerous, hidden and exposed. The Council of Laodicea, held around the year 363 of the Common Era, produced a list of approved texts and a prohibition against reading unapproved ones in the churches. The Book of Enoch was not on the approved list. Neither were many other texts that had circulated widely in the early centuries of the Christian movement. Texts that described heaven in terms that were too vast, too strange, too cosmologically overwhelming for an institution that needed its members to be able to function in the world, rather than being paralyzed by the scale of what they believed. A century and a half earlier, in the highlands of Phrygia, in what is now central Turkey, a movement had arisen that took the literal descent of the New Jerusalem with complete seriousness. The movement was called Montanism, after its founder, a man named Montanus, who had been, before his conversion, a priest in the cult of the goddess Cybele. Montanus, along with two prophetesses named Maximilla and Quintilla, claimed to speak directly in the voice of the Holy Spirit. And what the Holy Spirit told them through their mouths was that the New Jerusalem was coming. Soon, literally, physically. It was going to descend from the sky and land on the flat tableland of Phrygia, on the plain near the towns of Pepuza and Timion, and the faithful needed to gather there and wait for it. Thousands of people abandoned their homes. They dissolved their marriages. They gave away their property. They gathered on the plain and looked at the sky and waited for the golden cube to come through the clouds. The institutional church condemned the movement. Theologians argued that the New Jerusalem was a metaphor, an allegory, a spiritual symbol for the community of the faithful rather than a physical object that was going to crush the Phrygian countryside. Augustine, writing in the early 5th century, devoted considerable effort to establishing the allegorical reading of the city, to making it safe, to making it a symbol rather than an event, to making it something you could believe without having to stand on a plain in Turkey and look at the sky. And the institutional reading won. The allegorical reading became the orthodox reading. The literal, physical, cosmologically terrifying descent of a 1,400-mile cube of transparent gold was spiritualized into a metaphor for the church, and the church moved on, and the Montanists were condemned, and the Book of Enoch was excluded, and the Dead Sea Scrolls were buried in their caves, and the Nag Hammadi texts were sealed in their jar, and the world continued to be the world, with all its ordinary categories of inside and outside, sacred and profane, hidden and exposed, still intact. But the text remained. The cube remained. 12,000 stadia in every direction. The gates that were never shut. The light that needed no sun. The foundations of jeweled stone burning in their 12 colors. The throne at the center of the city with a river flowing from it, and on either side of the river the tree of life, bearing 12 kinds of fruit, yielding its fruit each month, its leaves for the healing of the nations. The tree of life. At the center of the city that is also the Holy of Holies, that is also the cosmos, that is also the bride of the divine, the tree that was in the center of the first garden, before the first act of disobedience, before the first exile, before the first gate was placed to prevent return. The tree is there, at the end, inside the city that has no outside, accessible to everyone who walks through the gates that are never shut. The exile is over. The garden is not restored. It is transfigured. It is inside the cube. It is inside the Holy of Holies. It is inside the presence that needs no sun. You are very far from the noise now. You are very deep. There is a reading of the cube that comes from the margins of the tradition, from the esoteric and the speculative, and the places where the orthodox and the unorthodox have always blurred into each other. It is the reading that sees the cube not as a building, but as a hyper-dimensional object, a tesseract, a 4-dimensional hypercube whose 3-dimensional shadow is the cube that John described. In the mathematics of higher dimensions, a 4-dimensional object intersecting with 3-dimensional space would appear to that space as a 3-dimensional form, the way a 3-dimensional hand passing through a 2-dimensional plane would appear to that plane as a 2-dimensional cross-section, a shape without depth, a shadow of the larger thing. If the New Jerusalem is a 4-dimensional object, then what John saw was its shadow. The cube is the shadow of something larger, something that contains it the way a cube contains a square, the way time contains space, the way the divine contains the cosmos. This reading is speculative. It is not canonical, but it is not incoherent, and it has a strange resonance with the ancient Kabbalistic tradition of the cube of space, with its axes and faces and edges and vertices, with its mapping of the Hebrew alphabet onto the dimensions of existence. If the 22 letters are the 22 elements of the cube of space, and if the cube of space is the shadow of a higher dimensional object, then the Hebrew alphabet is the shadow of a language that exists in a dimension we cannot perceive, a language in which the divine spoke the world into existence not in 3 dimensions, but in 4, not in space, but in space-time, not in the created order, but in the order that contains the created order, the way a box contains its contents. The New Jerusalem descends. It descends into the 3-dimensional world. It descends into the world of the abolished sea and the new earth and the new sky. And when it arrives, the world is no longer 3-dimensional in the old sense. The world is inside the cube. The world is inside the Holy of Holies. The world is inside the 4-dimensional object whose shadow is the cube. And the shadow has become the world, and the world has become the shadow of something larger than itself. And the something larger is the presence that needs no sun. Let the geometry dissolve now. Let the numbers become colors. Let the colors become warmth. There are scholars who have looked at the 12 foundation stones of the New Jerusalem and seen in them the 12 signs of the zodiac, the 12 divisions of the sky that the ancient world used to organize the movements of the stars and the cycles of time, and the character of the divine energy as it moved through the year. Josephus, the first-century Jewish historian, wrote that the 12 stones of the high priest's breastplate corresponded to the 12 months and the 12 signs of the zodiac. Philo of Alexandria made similar connections. If the foundation stones of the New Jerusalem are the same stones as the breastplate, and if the breastplate stones correspond to the zodiac, then the city rests on the sky. It rests on the 12 divisions of the celestial sphere. It rests on the structure of time itself, on the pattern by which the ancient world organized the movement of the heavens and the passage of the years and the unfolding of the divine plan through history. The city that descends from the sky rests on the sky. The city that replaces the cosmos is built on the structure of the cosmos. The city that needs no sun is founded on the 12 signs through which the sun moves. This is not a contradiction. It is a transfiguration. The old order is not destroyed. It is incorporated. It is made the foundation of the new order. The sky becomes the ground. The structure of time becomes the structure of the place where time no longer passes. And the gematria, the hidden mathematics of the text. The Greek numerical value of the phrase Lord Jesus Christ is 3,168. The number 3,168 is also, according to the calculations of certain esoteric mathematicians and sacred geometers, the master number from which the proportions of the New Jerusalem can be derived. The city is not merely described with numbers. The city is built of numbers. The city is the number. The name of the one who sits on the throne at its center is encoded into the dimensions of the walls, the foundations, the gates, the streets. The city is a word. The city is the word. The city is the logos made into geometry, the divine creative principle made into architecture, the first word spoken over the dark waters of the deep, made into a structure that will stand when the dark waters are gone, and the first creation has passed away. You are almost there. You can feel the weight of your eyelids. You can feel the warmth at the center of your chest. You can feel the thoughts becoming something gentler, something that moves like water rather than something that moves like stone. The sound of the city. The text does not describe the sound of the New Jerusalem directly, but the tradition that surrounds it is full of sound. Ezekiel, describing the approach of the divine chariot, the Merkavah, the vehicle of the divine presence that is the closest thing in the Hebrew tradition to a description of what the divine presence looks and sounds like when it moves. Ezekiel says that the sound of the wings of the living creatures was like the sound of many waters, like the voice of the Almighty, like the tumult of an army. the sound of many waters. This phrase appears again and again in the visionary literature of the ancient world, in Ezekiel and in Revelation, and in the traditions that connect them. It is the sound of a great waterfall, but larger. It is the sound of every ocean simultaneously. It is the sound of a frequency so low and so vast that you feel it in your chest before you hear it with your ears. A deep infrasonic hum that vibrates through the bones and the blood and the ancient animal parts of the brain that were there before language, before thought, before the capacity to name what is happening. And embedded in that crushing, omnipresent, planetary sound, there is music. Revelation 14 describes the sound as being like harpists playing their harps, delicate and precise and mathematically perfect, woven into the thunder and the rushing water the way a melody is woven into the noise of the world, present if you are still enough to hear it, lost if you are too agitated to be still. The city is full of that sound. The throne is the source of that sound. The river that flows from the throne carries that sound with it, through the streets of transparent gold, past the tree of life on both its banks, out through the gates that are never shut, into the world that is now entirely inside the city, entirely inside the Holy of Holies, entirely inside the presence that needs no sun. And the nations walk in its light, and the kings of the earth bring their glory into it. And the gates are not shut by day, and there is no night there. And they shall bring the glory and the honor of the nations into it, and nothing unclean shall enter it, nor anyone who does what is detestable or false, but only those who are written in the Lamb's book of life. This is the end of the exclusion. This is the end of the boundary between sacred and profane, between inside and outside, between the holy place and the place where the holy place is not. Because the holy place is now everywhere. Because the city is now the world. Because the world is now the city. The gates are open, and they will not close because there is nothing outside them that needs to be kept out. The old categories have dissolved. The old separations have been transfigured. What was unclean has been made clean or has ceased to exist, and what remains is only what was always, underneath everything, fundamentally and irreducibly itself. The river. Return to the river. It flows from the throne of God and of the Lamb. It is bright as crystal. It runs through the middle of the street of the city. On either side of the river is the tree of life, the same tree that stood in the first garden, the garden before the exile, the garden before the cherubim with the flaming sword were placed at its entrance to prevent the return. The tree is back. The exile is over. The sword is gone. The cherubim have folded their 4 wings, and their 4 faces are at rest, and the sound of their movement is no longer the sound of an army, and the sound of many waters, but something quieter now, something that has resolved into stillness, the way a chord resolves into its root, the way a question resolves into the silence that was always its true answer. The tree bears 12 kinds of fruit, 1 for each month, 1 for each foundation stone, 1 for each gate, 1 for each tribe, 1 for each apostle, 1 for each sign through which the sun once moved before the sun was no longer needed. The tree is the calendar made edible. The tree is the structure of time made nourishing. You can eat the year. You can eat the sky. You can eat the pattern of the cosmos that was once above you and is now the ground beneath the city and the fruit on the branches of the tree that grows in the river that flows from the throne. And the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations, not the destruction of the nations, not the replacement of the nations, the healing. The word in the Greek is therapeia. It is the word from which we get therapy. It is the word for service, for care, for the tending of something that has been damaged back toward wholeness. The nations survive into the new creation. They bring their glory through the open gates. They are healed by the leaves of the tree that grows in the river that flows from the throne. They are not erased. They are restored. They are made what they were always trying to be and never quite managed to become. Made it the way a piece of music is finally made complete when the last note sounds and the silence after it contains everything that came before. Let the images slow now. Let them become less distinct. Let them soften at the edges the way things soften when you are very close to sleep, when the boundary between the thought and the dream becomes permeable, when the images begin to move on their own without your direction, when you are no longer the one making the pictures, but the one to whom the pictures are given. There is a throne at the center of the city. There is a river flowing from the throne. There is a tree on both banks of the river. There is light that comes from no lamp and no sun. There is sound like many waters with music woven into it. There is a name on the foreheads of those who are there, a name that is the same as the name encoded in the dimensions of the walls, the same as the name that is the number, that is the geometry, that is the city. There is no temple, because the presence is the temple. There is no night, because the presence is the light. There is no more sea, because the restlessness is over. There is no more death, because the separation is over. There is no more mourning, or crying, or pain, because the old order, the order in which those things were possible, has passed away. And the one on the throne says, "Behold, I make all things new." Not, "Behold, I make all new things." Not a replacement, not a substitution, the same things. The nations, the kings, the earth, the sky, the tree, the river, the city, the people. All of it. New. Made new. Renewed. Restored to what it was before the damage, before the exile, before the cherubim and the flaming sword, before the sea, before the darkness on the face of the deep. Made new the way a morning is new. Made new the way a breath is new. Made new the way you are new, right now, on the edge of sleep, releasing the weight of the day, releasing the weight of the year, releasing the weight of everything you have been carrying that was never yours to carry. You are allowed to put it down. You are allowed to put it down here, at the edge of the river, under the tree, inside the city, inside the light that needs no sun, inside the sound that is many waters and music simultaneously, inside the presence that is the temple and the throne and the first word spoken over the dark waters and the last word spoken before the silence that is not empty but full, full of everything, full of the glory that the nations bring through the open gates, full of the fruit of the tree that is the healing of all things. Put it down. Let the geometry go. Let the numbers go. Let the foundation stones and the gates and the measurements and the gematria and the zodiac and the merkava and the cherubim and the flaming sword all go. Let them dissolve back into the light from which they came. Let the light dissolve into warmth. Let the warmth dissolve into the weight of your body against the surface beneath you. The simple animal fact of your weight, your breath, your heartbeat, the ancient rhythms that were there before language and will be there after thought, the rhythms that know, without being told, how to keep you alive through the night. how to carry you through the dark hours into the morning that is always, in the end, waiting on the other side. The city is there. It will be there when you wake. It will be there in the proportions of the things you find beautiful without knowing why. It will be there in the moments when the music resolves and the silence after it is full. It will be there in the light on the water and the sound of rain and the warmth at the center of your chest that has no explanation and needs none. Sleep now.